Hello, and welcome to Missouri Law Matters, a podcast about your Missouri courts. My name is Matt Hamner, and I want to thank you for being here today. This podcast is available on all the places that you might find your podcast, so please like and subscribe us on all those platforms, as well as anywhere else you might find us on YouTube, Spotify, or any place you get your podcast. We would love for you to follow our podcast so we can continue to provide you information about the Missouri courts and the incredible work that the folks working in those courts do. Today, particularly, we want to talk a little bit about civic education. I'm guessing most people don't even know that the Missouri Supreme Court has an arm that is focused specifically on civic education and providing information to members of the public about how our courts function, the rules that we have to follow, and the ways that we follow those rules as part of those courts. Joining me today, I'm extremely excited to have an incredible guest for you, to have a conversation about civic education, to have a conversation about the court system, and also about her path to becoming a judge. My guest today is the Honorable Judge Rebeca Navarro-McKelvey from the Eastern District Court of Appeals in St. Louis. Judge Navarro-McKelvey, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Good morning, Judge Hamner. I appreciate being here.
Now, you have been on the Eastern District for how long now?
It's been a year. Actually, I was appointed in December 8th of 2023, so it's just right at a year, and it's been an incredible year.
Well, and as some people may know, and as I've mentioned before, I am also a judge on the Court of Appeals, but our Court of Appeals is divided into three different districts. There's a Eastern District, a Western District, and a Southern District. So while you and I are both judges on the Court of Appeals, we work in different districts.
Correct. And the Eastern District is, I think, the largest district geographically and has the most judges at this time.
Yeah, and certainly I think they probably population-wise are probably our largest district. Your court is based in St. Louis, and so that's kind of the eastern side of the state.
Correct. It's in the old post office building, which is just a beautiful courthouse. Originally, it was a federal courthouse, which explains the beautiful fireplace that's behind me. But yes, it's a beautiful building located in right downtown St. Louis.
I had the privilege of visiting your all's chambers a couple of months ago when I was in the St. Louis area, and it really is a beautiful old historic building in downtown St. Louis. And you all have very nice digs there. That is certainly true. Judge, thank you so much for joining me this morning. But before we get into talking about civic education, which is kind of one of the focuses I know that you have and I want to talk to you about, I always like to talk to everybody who comes on the podcast a little bit about their background and kind of how they found their way to the law and how they found their way to the bench. And I know from knowing you from over the years and spending time talking with you, your path's a little different than a lot of the judges that we have in the state of Missouri. So just tell our listeners a little bit about, kind of how you found your way to the law and starting with how you found your way to America.
Yes, I'm originally from Managua, Nicaragua, which is a small country in Latin America. And my mother, Maritza Navarro, who actually just went back to Nicaragua today, she was an attorney there, and my dad was an architect. And in 1980, there was a communist revolution that deposed the previous government. And my mother had been a government lawyer, a government worker, like I eventually became a government lawyer. And, unfortunately there, unlike the wonderful system we have here, when a new government comes along, depending on who you worked for, even if you weren't necessarily politically active, you were just a government worker, you were targeted. And so for either imprisonment or worse, at that time, there had been a revolution where over 50,000 people were killed in that conflict. And this is a very small country, so it's a significant portion of the population. And so my parents knew that they had to leave. And the question was where to go. And I always tell them, like, why didn't we go to Miami like many Hispanic people did, or California, someplace where the weather is better? But my father, who was an architect, he had a brother that lived in Columbia, Missouri, that had immigrated to the United States in the 1960s. He was a doctor, and at that time there was a shortage of physicians, and so he was immigrated here and was practicing radiology, and so he petitioned for us to come and become residents, and so we were residents in 1980. I lived in Columbia, Missouri, in a trailer court. And my parents were never able to practice their professions again. They were really more focused on paying the bills and seeing what they could do for me. And really, they had to learn the language. They were I think 35 and 37 when they came over here. So learning the language was the most important thing. And the easiest place to do that was in fast food. So my parents worked in fast food and so did I. And my dad first worked at a restaurant called Taco Tico because he thought people there would speak Spanish, but they did not. But anyway, eventually we learned to cook Mandarin Chinese food. It's kind of a strange thing for Hispanic people to do, but we did. And we opened our own Chinese restaurant. And we had a Chinese restaurant for 14 years in Jefferson City, Missouri. And that's where I spent most of my formative years. The American Walk was our restaurant on High Street. And we lived in an apartment above it, very close to the Capitol. And so I was always interested in government work, primarily because I liked the fact that the ladies that I saw that worked for the government seemed to wear really pretty clothes, but with tennis shoes. And I thought, wow, I would like to do that someday. So through that work, I did get to know folks that worked in various government agencies. And I always wondered how they did that. And, I think like most of us that have come into these positions, mentorship has played a huge role in our lives. There were always people along the way that were willing to give us their time and their knowledge and experience to guide us. So I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't know how that was going to happen because we didn't have those types of connections in our family or anything like that. But by virtue of my restaurant, we just met a lot of folks that kind of explained the process to me.
That's awesome. And certainly, I remember your restaurant. I'm not the biggest Chinese food eater in the world. I spent a lot of time in Jefferson City, particularly on downtown. So I remember the American Walk. So that is super cool. Now, I wanted to back up and ask you about, you talked about coming to America from Nicaragua. You mentioned that your parents were in their 30s. How old were you when this happened?
When I came to the United States, I was 5. So for me, the transition was fairly easy. Obviously, I had to learn English. Kids are like sponges. People always say, no, you don't have an accent. Any language that you can get exposed to under the age of 10, you probably will not have an accent. My parents obviously do. They were very adamant about only speaking Spanish in the home because they wanted me to speak perfect Spanish. And I'm very fortunate that I do. And that skill has really helped me in my work. But they were also very adamant about, when in Rome, you do as the Romans do and assimilating to this culture. And this was my new home and wanting to do something for this country and for this community. We became American citizens in 1986. We took our oath in Independence, Missouri. And when we came back to Jefferson City after taking our oath, many people, many customers, and just people in the community that knew our story and knew we had just become citizens, they were just thrilled for us. They came with like 5 or 6 American flag cakes that day and red, white, and blue flowers. And, my parents told me when you are a guest in someone's home, it's even more important for you to leave that home in better shape than it was when you got there. And so I think that's something that's really stuck with me, that really motivated me to find a path to public service. Now, I always wanted to do it in the law, and how exactly I was going to do that, I didn't know. I was eventually able to secure an Army ROTC scholarship to go to the University of Missouri Columbia for undergraduate. And I always joke, I don't know if you remember that movie, Private Benjamin, but that was kind of me, that movie. I don't know that I was the best suitable candidate, but I did have that experience. I ended up resigning my commission and having to pay all that back because I couldn't get a deferment from active duty to go to law school. I wanted to go straight from undergrad to law school. And I would have had to do 7 years active duty before that. And at that time, I thought, going to law school in your late 20s was like being an old lady or something. I realize now that it was not. But I did end up going straight through, and I went to Mizzou as well. And I had, I think, a tremendous support from people in my community that were excited to see me on that path. And once I got there, I met so many other people from all kinds of walks of life. Some people that maybe law was a family tradition for them. Some people that maybe were the first person in their family to graduate from college, all kinds of things. But they were all motivated by being of service to others. And I think whether you're in private practice for a law firm or you're a government attorney, like my career turned out to be, lawyers are counselors first. They're there to hear people's problems and find ways to give them solutions. So that's kind of their purpose, is to serve the community in a variety of capacities.
Certainly. And in full disclosure, I also, of course, went to undergrad and law school at Mizzou. So you and I share that. And we were just a year or two apart when we were in school. And you mentioned, finding law students being a little different, not having any lawyers in your family. I was the same way. I didn't have any lawyers or professionals in my family that were really kind of trailblazers for me. Probably one of the things I was most surprised about when I got to law school was that I kind of thought it was all going to be people who grew up in a family of lawyers, who had brothers or sisters, or who had mothers or aunts or something that all were lawyers, and, kind of the thing. And the majority of the folks that I met in law school were not that way. They were similar to you and I in that they knew that they had a passion for law or were interested in the law, and they wanted to do it, even though nobody else in their family had really ever done it before. So I think that's a common misconception that I think anybody, if you have an interest in the law and if you have a passion for studying the law and learning the law, you can be a lawyer. It doesn't matter whether you know lawyers, whether you grew up with lawyers, or whether you have some legacy in your family. You don't have to have any of that. All you have to do is have a intellectual curiosity and a willingness to work really hard, and you can do it.
I agree 100%. Something that I became interested on later on in my life is public service through elected office. I was an elected judge in St. Charles County before I was part of the nonpartisan court plan. And I think similar to becoming a lawyer, folks sometimes think that if they don't know anyone in close proximity that's had those experiences like being a public servant, that, I don't know anyone, I can't do that, but you can. And one of the things that I learned through that experience of becoming a judge, I was an associate circuit judge and then a circuit judge. And before that, I was a prosecutor. I was a sex crimes, child abuse prosecutor. And those public facing type professions is that the key to entering, I think, any field where you don't have the experience, where maybe you don't have any connections, is mentorship. And one thing that I think the judiciary is really trying to do through civic education is talking to those folks like you, like me, that think, oh, well, this is not something that's obtainable for me because I don't have those experiences, or I don't have folks in my family that do that. And just, having an interface with a judge or a lawyer and saying, well, now I do know one because one came to speak to my classroom, or I went to a courthouse and I saw a judge, or I went to someone's law office and I saw what they do. So I do know someone. And now I can talk to someone about what is that process. One of the things that I've done as a judge, and I have this program in conjunction with Judge Marty Seaton, who's a judge in Jackson County, a circuit judge in Jackson County. We have a program called Tomorrow's Lawyers, and it's really targeted to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, because I think the earlier you ignite someone's passion and give them the self-confidence to say, like, this is attainable for me, the better. I think, not that you can't do it later, but I think when you're in high school, you've either internally made or society's kind of imposed certain ideas of what you're going to do. But in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, I think there's more open-mindedness. And so this program allows a judge and a lawyer with kind of unique and different backgrounds, I guess what I would say atypical backgrounds in the law, to come in and tell their story. And one of the things we do is we show goofy pictures of ourselves as 6th and 7th graders to kind of let everybody know it's okay if you don't even know any lawyers in your whole community. I think sometimes in rural areas, there's a real shortage for lawyers. And folks that are in those areas think, well, if I want, to do a job in the legal profession, then I have to leave my home. I have to leave my community. And that's not necessarily true. If you want to do that, sure. But you can serve your community right at home, whether you know any lawyers there or not. And so we bring in folks with very unique and interesting backgrounds. So hopefully the young audience can say, well, I'm like that guy, or I'm like that girl. I can do that too. That's kind of the goal. So if there's any teachers out there that would be interested, please let us know.
And certainly teachers, anybody that wants an opportunity to have judges come out and talk to their kids, we want to make that happen. And that is part of the civic education program, also part of your program for new lawyers. I know that kids particularly is something that you're passionate about. I know that you worked, in addition to prosecuting in St. Charles County, you also worked in the juvenile office for a period of time working with kids and in those circumstances. So I know that's a big piece. You're also involved in other organizations that I know do some work in St. Louis. One particularly is an organization that I had not even heard of until I started doing a little research for this, the Garden of Innocence. Tell us a little bit about that project.
Yeah, my husband and I founded that. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, and we founded that in 2003, 21 years ago. And at that time, I was an attorney at Armstrong Teasdale, which is a civil law firm here in St. Louis. I had just had my first child, and I heard a story on the news about a young little infant, really a 4-month-old infant, that was killed by her mother. Her mother was suffering from very serious mental health issues, and she was untreated. And the news story kind of made it seem as if this young infant didn't have anyone to take care of her final needs because her mother was in custody. The news story didn't say there was any family. So anyway, I inquired and learned that at that time, the city had a process for indigent burials for children that were abandoned. And I was like, how does that even happen? But there are circumstances sometimes where women would come in and give birth and would leave against medical advice and leave the children there, and the child would pass away. Or sometimes when a child was a victim of a crime and the parent was a perpetrator and there were no other family members. So what would happen, not from a lack of caring, but just from a lack of resources, is that these children would be buried in unmarked graves without any kind of ceremony, without any name, without any clothes even. And again, the staff at the medical examiner's office are wonderful, caring people, but government is just not set up to fiscally or otherwise to have those kinds of resources. So what we do is we provide memorial ceremonies and burials for abandoned infants and children throughout the metropolitan area. So not just St. Louis, but throughout the eastern side of the state. And so what that includes is we have a livery service that we take care of, so that comes and retrieves the child. Volunteers from the community make handmade burial layettes, clothing for these children. Some of them are very, very tiny. They just fit in a little envelope or pouch. Some of them are, I think we've had a 2-year-old before, but all the clothing is made just by folks in the community that just want to do something. We have a funeral service and musicians play. We have a printed program like you would at the funeral of any member of our community. And we eulogize the child. We tell, folks from the community what this child's background was about. We name them. And the reason for all that is that these were our members of our community. And every time something like this happens, we as a community are losing an opportunity. We don't know who that person would have been. They could have been the next person that finds a cure for cancer, or they could have been that person at the grocery store that checks you out and smiles at you and asks you how your day is and makes you feel better. But that potential is lost. And when that potential is lost, we think as members of the community, it's important to grieve that and to give that person some dignity. So over the last 21 years, we've, I think, buried over 50 children. And you can go to the Garden of Innocence. It's located in North St. Louis at Calvary Cemetery. And I've met so many just wonderful and interesting people from the community that just want to be a part of taking care of their fellow citizens, really.
Well, it's an incredible program, and I was really interested when I heard about it, and I'm very appreciative of you taking the time to explain it for our listeners today. Wonderful work that you and the group of folks that are supporting that organization are doing there. It's a classic example of finding a need and figuring out a way to kind of fill it. And I'm very grateful to you and to all those who are kind of undertaking that to push that project forward. You've mentioned a couple of times in our discussion the importance of mentorship, and you are certainly not the first guest that we have had on the podcast, but every single one of them that we have had has discussed the importance of mentorship in their life and how it helped propel them forward and drive them forward to become a good lawyer, to become a judge, to reach, the heights that they had aspired to and do these things. Who are some of the people that, you coming from immigrating into the country, kind of from a non-traditional background, who are some of the people that you were able to reach out to and have as a mentor that kind of helped you on this path?
Certainly my family, although they didn't, practice law or have a professional career here, that example of gratefulness for the opportunities that you are given, and that example of, hard work and setting goals for yourself and going after them. That's something I saw them do every day. I didn't ever see them be despondent over the kind of, life that they lost, and instead never look backwards, always look forward and look at the opportunities that we have in front of us. So they're certainly my mom and dad are my primary role models of that. And then in the profession, judge, I had a judge, Judge Dan Pelican, who's retiring after 25 years on the bench.
That's wonderful.
Yes. I think that the key to mentorship, I think you can be a mentor in the lives of other people in many ways. Some are professional mentors. Some are maybe mentors to us as mothers or fathers or spouses or as just community members. But the key to it, and I think what I've had with Judge Pelican, is that a mentor sees something in you that you do not see in yourself. They see a potential for you that you have not yet realized you have. And then they encourage, but they also give you practical tools and advice. And that takes a certain amount of time and investment in the mentee. And I think it's really important to do. And it's important to pass on. I always say, don't be one of those folks that once you've gotten on the lifeboat, on the life raft, you pull up the ladder. You're not extending it to the next person. Once you've been helped and achieved certain things that you want to achieve, it's kind of your obligation to help the next guy or gal. And that's something that I saw modeled with Judge Pelican, and that I try to model myself.
Certainly, as we've discussed many times on this podcast, and I'm glad to hear you emphasize again today, mentorship, very important in this process. And that's not just for those people who are looking to get into the profession, but also for those people already in. As you say, don't pull up the ladder. We are continually encouraging lawyers and judges to reach out to younger members in their community, to reach out to younger law students, to reach out to young lawyers, to provide some of that guidance, because we all had help. Every one of us that came up through the system had help in one way or another. And it's very important that we continue that, not just to give these folks an opportunity, but because in order for the profession to continue to be healthy and to be successful and to provide the service that we need to provide for the folks in our community, we need to be passing that knowledge along. We need to be passing that care along. And so it's become very important. And I'm very appreciative of you for speaking on it to that extent. You practiced law for a good period of time, but then, as you mentioned, you became an associate circuit judge and then elevated to a circuit judge. And then finally, about a year ago, to the Court of Appeals in St. Louis. Talk about that transition from going to the trial bench and finally up to an appellate court where you are now. What has that transition been like for you?
It's very different, Judge Hamner, as I'm sure you can relate to as well, having been a trial judge as well. I kind of describe it as going from an emergency room to a monastery. And the reason I say that is it's just a different skill set. When you are in a trial judge position, you are dealing with folks constantly that are physically in front of you, lawyers, litigants, jurors, prisoners. I think the press is there probably more often than you would see in appellate type courts. So you just are interacting with a whole host of the community. Unrepresented litigants is very common in a trial bench kind of situation, as are represented. And if you get to write more than 5 or 10 pages as a trial judge, that's a lot. Because just the volume of the cases and a lot of your pronouncements, are made in open court. So there's not a need to write a big, long judgment. Obviously, I say obviously, but not everyone may be familiar with the Court of Appeals or appellate court. So let me lay down some groundwork for folks that maybe are not in the legal profession. someone takes issue with the decision of the trial judge, they can appeal that to the Court of Appeals. In some cases, the decision of the Court of Appeals can be taken up to the Missouri Supreme Court. So on the appellate level, we make case law. That's what we do, right? We take whatever happened in the trial court level and we see, is there a problem with it? But we're not getting to hear those witnesses anymore. We're not getting to see the photographs or the map or the gun or whatever exhibits were. Occasionally we can, but very rarely. We're just reading the record. Now we're reading the transcript of what happened. We're reading briefs where the lawyers explain their positions. And then instead of working alone, when you're a trial judge, you're kind of a lone ranger. You make the decisions yourself. As an appellate judge, you sit in panels of 3. So there's this very collaborative way to work, which is very different when you're used to being a solo practitioner, so to speak. And then it's all writing, the way that you make your pronouncements, the way people find out what the decision or the outcome is, it's all in writing. In this written decision called an opinion, it can be pages and pages long, can't it, Judge Hamner?
It can. It's been known to do that from time to time.
So I think it requires a different skill, certainly writing, legal research on a much, much deeper level, that having to work with other judges to come to a consensus. And sometimes, we may disagree and we may have to have some give and take. Well, I think that this part of the opinion, if you put this case in or you shape it that way, then I would agree with you. But if you don't, I may have to dissent, which means just disagree and write my own opinion, different from what the majority of folks are writing. So it's been a very different experience, a wonderful experience, a big learning curve. And again, mentorship has played a tremendous role for me here. I have several judges here on my court that have taken the time to really teach me the art of writing, because it is an art and one that I'm a novice person to. But, what's the thought process? How do you organize an opinion? We work with law clerks. That's something that's very different for me. In my circuit, we didn't have law clerks.
Nor did we.
Okay, so you understand. So a law clerk is a lawyer that works with a judge. They help you write these opinions. They help you do drafts. They help you research the issues and discuss them with you. That's a whole new process for me, because that wasn't something in my circuit that we had. Some trial circuits do have law clerks that assist the judges, but for Judge Hamner and I, that was not a luxury we had. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. But like any new experience, it's been challenging, it's been difficult, sometimes frustrating. And I only say those things so that folks that are thinking about going into any profession, but especially the legal profession, don't let the fact that you've never done something before or that you're new at it keep you from going forward and learning that new skill, because it's been the first time for something for everyone. And that's how I feel about being a new appellate judge.
Well, and certainly you are absolutely right. And one of the things I think we've discussed before on this podcast, and I want to reemphasize to folks is that one of the things that makes the legal profession particularly unique is that there's so many avenues. There's so many things that you can do within the profession. If you like to stand up and argue with people, we've got jobs for you to do that. If you don't want to see anybody and you just want to sit in an office and draft contracts or deeds, we got a place you can do that. There are so many different places and roles that you can serve within the judicial system, within the legal profession, that really, I can promise you, whatever your interest is, you can find something within the law that you can participate in that and cater to that interest. And I think that's just one of the things that makes our profession so cool. Also, one of the things about it that's so cool is getting to work with really cool people. And
Absolutely.
I know I've had that experience here at the Southern District. I love to hear you talking about it. I know several of your colleagues on the Eastern District know they are also awesome people. And it's really a privilege to get to work with folks like that. One of the ways as judges that we do additional work, in addition to the cases that we hear and the things that we do, is that we also serve on committees and we work with commissions and we do various things for the court, whether it be working on rules that are used to how the courts are structured and utilized, to working on policy issues and coming up with ideas on how we can make things better and different types of law better. I know that you serve on many committees, and I've got a whole list of them here, all the various committees and things that you do, and appreciative of all that work you do. But one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about today was civic education, because that was kind of one of the thrusts of what we wanted to talk about today. So you're on the committee for civic education. Explain a little bit to our listeners what the idea is behind the Supreme Court having a civic education committee.
Well, part of our role as judges, and you mentioned we have rules about how the courts are supposed to run. We also have rules about what a judge's obligations, duties, especially ethical duties are. And one of those is to participate in civic education. That's actually one of our rules. And the purpose behind civic education, and for me, it's for me personally, coming from a country where the government was dysfunctional, where people's rights were trod upon. You could get arrested without a warrant and you could be thrown in jail and not see a judge for weeks, months, or ever, or your property could be seized without any compensation. Those are real things that are happening in the world, happen to my family. So for me, civic education has an even bigger importance, because I think when folks know how special the type of government that we have in this country and our Constitution is, and the more informed they are about it, that's the way to keep it safe. That's the way to safeguard. And the key to that is not like old folks like me, but the young people that are going to grow up to be the leaders of the next generation. And so, the Supreme Court is passionate about going out to not just to young people, to adults as well, but in particular to young people, and telling them how our courts work, how our rights are protected, how the Constitution works. What is your obligation as a citizen? What are your rights? If you don't know those things, then you can't stand up for them. You can't see when they're being obliterated. You can't work to make them better. And so in civic education, we go into classrooms, we go into the community, whether it's a Rotary group or a Lions group, church groups, faith groups, all types of community groups, and discuss these issues. We have presentations that we can give that are high tech. We have presentations that we can give that are low tech if you just want to kind of have a conversation. We have pre-prepared presentations on specific issues, like Fourth Amendment search and seizure is a really popular one that especially middle schoolers like to know. It's called Can the School Search Your Stuff? That's something that people want to know about. Another one is about First Amendment rights and free speech on the internet. That's a topic that's very timely and very important, both for businesses and for our young people. That's something that they're very interested in. So we have these presentations that are already created that we can put on as a PowerPoint, but we also have just the ability to have judges come in and just talk to you one-on-one and just get to know them as people. We have a presentation like what's a day in the life of Judge Hamner? What's a day in life in an appellate court judge position or a trial judge position. I've invited municipal judges. I think municipal judges are some of the folks that maybe most of the public has had some contact with, right? If, get a ticket, or, your grass is too high, or municipal ordinances, you're probably more likely to have had contact with those folks than you are with an appellate judge. But getting to know those people as members of your community, as human beings, I think demystifies some of what the legal process and the court system really is about. So I think civic education is really key to that. The more that you know about the system and the people in it, the more comfortable and easier it is to trust that the system does work and that the people in it work for you. And they work under this very clear set of rules, both state and of course our federal Constitution, that they're loyal to, that's important to them. And sometimes, like in my case, you can share specifics as to why it's so important to them. Why, when we wear that black robe, that means I'm not sitting here as Rebecca, the individual. I'm sitting here as a representative of the law, and I am beholden to the law, regardless of what my, worldview or personal beliefs are. That's gone. And all of us that work in the judiciary believe that so strongly. And we want to make sure that people understand how that process developed, that it's still there, and to answer any questions they have about them.
Having been a judge myself now for a little over 10 years, I have personally participated in the civic education process and have gone out and made presentations and have helped to organize presentations. And I can't tell you how effective they are. And from firsthand experience in speaking to students and from speaking to local groups, how effective they are in communicating to folks and kind of helping them understand the work that we do. And sometimes, as you said, demystifying why it is that we do things certainly ways the way that we do it. We don't always do things in the law the way that people expect that it would be done. And that is because we are governed by sets of rules that have been around for hundreds of years, that have developed over time. And that's what we utilize. But in making all of these presentations and have all of this information provided, I still run into people every day, educators, people who are involved with civic organizations, who have no idea that we do this, who have no idea that they can have a judge come and talk to their classroom, that can come and talk to their group about the work that we do and the law, and to talk to them about the process and answer questions about the process. For folks that are listening to this, who are educators or who are involved in planning events for social groups or for their organizations, what can they do if they want a judge to come and talk to them? What can they do to try to make that happen?
Well, we have a website, and now you're going to put me on the spot because I'm not going to know the exact URL address. But if you
I can help you out with that.
Okay, good. We have a website.
It might be www.courts.mo.gov/civic education. And
wonderful.
Folks, I know in this day and age, nobody actually types in email or web addresses anymore. If you just go to your search engine of choice and you put in Missouri Courts Civic Education, you're going to find the Missouri Courts Civic Education page.
Absolutely. And once you're on that page, it is very user-friendly. There's a list of presentations. So depending on your audience, if you're an educator and you have like a kindergarten or fourth grade or high school or college, or whether you're not in an educational setting, you're wanting something for a civic group, a business group, a faith group, you'll see all of the presentations listed and what they're about, the approximate length, whether they require any kind of technological access, and you can pick according to that. Maybe you're having just a lunch meeting that's very short and you can't have a 45-minute presentation. There's a presentation out there that will fit your group. Like I always say, there's a lid for every pot. So you will find something there that will interest you and will be timely. And as I mentioned before, if you're not looking for a specific presentation, you would just like to meet a judge. And sometimes people have questions about things that they've read or seen on the news and why is this way? Now, we can't always opine on things that we don't have enough information about and we don't know about, but we can at least tell you how the judiciary works and how we can only decide things within a certain box, and that box is the law. And that may give folks a perspective to understand how judges make decisions. We can't explain a particular decision in a particular case by a particular judge because that would be inappropriate and we don't have the knowledge to do that. But we can explain the judicial decision-making process. And I think that's what most people are very mystified about. And when we can explain that very clearly and logically and sequentially, people feel a lot more confident as to how those decisions are made.
Absolutely. And I think that has been my experience with the civic education process is, knowledge is power and knowledge is helpful. And the more knowledge that members of the public have about the process, about how it actually works, rather than just what they see on TV and in the movies, the more knowledge that they have about that, certainly, I think it only helps them understand why the courts function the way they do, why sometimes decisions get made the way they do. I always encourage folks that if you have a curiosity about the law, if you're curious about how it works, come see us. All of our courts are open to the public. Most courts function 5 days a week. There's usually always something going on at the courthouse. If you've got some time and you're interested, come on down, have a seat in one of the courtrooms and just watch how the process works. You're going to learn a lot about it. You're going to learn a lot about how it functions on the day-to-day. And I think it's going to be a real eye-opener. Now, as a member of the Civic Education Committee, you guys are focused on trying to communicate all of this information. And we talked a little bit about the website. You can go there. You can request presentations. The website itself also has a lot of information on it that is educational about how the courts function and how judges get selected and all those various questions that you may have, overview type questions of the court system. But as we kind of look into the future a little bit, we know that the way people receive and process information is changing. It's changing pretty rapidly these days. Where do you see the concept of civic education, and where might you see reading the tea leaves, looking 5-10 years into the future? What are the types of things that you think you could see civic education changing to, or the ways that you think it's going to adapt as we get more kind of technologically advanced?
Well, and you know that I'm a bit of a Luddite, but I think this is a great example. What we're doing here today is civic education. And I don't think I could have imagined it 10 years ago that judges would be having a podcast. So I think that technology and the pandemic and what we saw with webinars and what we saw interest in podcasts and things like that, it has grown exponentially since the pandemic. And so I think that we will be able to reach a wider audience, a more diverse audience because of this technological capability. We do travel anywhere and everywhere. I do want to put that out there. If you want an in-person experience, if you are in an area it's not as accessible or time constraints or whatever, I can see civic education doing things remotely. Why not? I can see like conversations like this that are recorded and can be played at a later date at the convenience of the audience. So all of those things. And also, I think there's more opportunity now for interaction. We're even seeing it in our judicial training. I'm part of the Trial Judge Education Committee. That committee is in charge of giving training to judges in the state. And we're about to hold a judicial academy specifically for juvenile judges. And it's all going to be done remotely. And, you know, they can be breakout sections to discuss specific issues. And all the material is at a touch of a button and in front of the faculty and the students. And that allows us to reach a wider group of judges. Judges, like everybody else, are very busy. It's difficult for them to travel and go off for 2 days and put off their dockets and their very important cases to do that on site. And here's another way to educate our judges, doing that more cost effectively, being able to have more people and doing it in a way that has less impact on judicial economy, meaning on the administration of justice for that particular jurisdiction because the judge is not having to travel. So I think all of those advances can be utilized in the civic education arena.
When you go out and you present civic education programs, which I know that you have, what's the most common question you get? And it might depend on the audience that you're presenting to. It may be different depending on whether it's kids or whether it's adults.
I do mostly children because that's just kind of my bailiwick, what I enjoy. And the most common question I have is, what's the weirdest case you've ever had or funniest case you've ever had? They always want to know. And so I tell them a story about a case which was an order of protection case, but the discussion was about, I think his name was Andy, and I thought that they were talking about a child. And I was very concerned because both parties were accusing each other of mistreating Andy and leaving Andy unattended for hours without any food or water. It turned out that Andy was a lizard. Andy is in good hands. Andy is okay. But for most of this hearing, I was very alarmed and about to make a call to the children's division and take emergency custody, but it was a little lizard. So anyway.
I know I join in all of our listeners in saying, thank goodness Andy is safe. Because I was very concerned as you were telling that story. So
Yes.
Judge, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you coming on to speak with us a little bit about civic education and its role. Again, I want to plug the website for those that want to type it in. It's www.courts.mo.gov/civic education. But again, if you want to go to a search engine and you want to type in Missouri Courts Civic Education, that's going to pull up that website as well. It has all sorts of information about how you can request a presentation from a judge who will come and speak to your group, organization about the law and about the things that we do. Judge, before I let you go, one last thing I've been asking everybody that I have on. What's your favorite thing that you have seen lately? And it can be like a movie or a TV show or a sunset or just anything. What have you seen lately that's really impressed you?
The Cricut machine. Do you know what a Cricut machine is?
I don't. Oh, yes, I think I do. But explain it to the folks who are listening that might not know.
So it's a machine that makes, I guess, vinyl adhesives, right? Or iron-ons. I have gotten this machine as a birthday gift, and I am just discovering a side of creativity I didn't know I had. So Judge Hamner, you might get a t-shirt for me that says I was on the Courts podcast, So yeah, that's been a lot of fun. So that's the little light in my life right now.
Yes, the Cricut is basically a 3D printer for decals and clothes.
Exactly.
It's a fabulous machine. It's really cool.
It is very cool.
For those that are much more artistically inclined than me, I can understand how it's really exciting. But yes, I've had some experience with the Cricut. It's very, very cool.
Yes. Thank
Judge,
you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And I want to thank you again for being on today. And I want to thank all of our listeners for being with us today. For Missouri Law Matters, a podcast about your Missouri courts. Don't forget to, if you've enjoyed the episode today, you want to find out when we're going to have another episode, you want to make sure you don't miss it, please like and subscribe to the podcast on all the places where you get your podcast. Also be looking for those video drops on YouTube and on our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram. We appreciate everybody joining us today. With nothing else to present, this podcast will be adjourned. Thanks, Judge.
Thank you.